Most people have been told that if they want to improve their cardiovascular fitness and live longer, they should spend more time in zone 2, long, steady, moderate intensity exercise. And don't get me wrong, zone 2 has real benefits. It improves mitochondrial density, metabolic flexibility, and fat oxidation. But today I want to talk about something that surprised even a lot of scientists. When it comes to increasing VO2 max, which is one of the strongest predictors of longevity and cardiovascular health, zone 2 is not the most effective tool. VO2 max is the maximum amount of oxygen your body can use during intense exercise. It reflects how well your heart pumps blood, how efficiently your lungs exchange oxygen, and how effectively your muscles extract and use that oxygen. And what's really important here is that VO2 max is not just about athletic performance. Large population studies show that higher VO2 max is associated with dramatically lower risk of cardiovascular disease, neurodegenerative disease, and all-cause mortality. In fact, being in the lowest category of VO2 max is a stronger predictor of early death than smoking, diabetes, or hypertension. So improving VO2 max is not optional if your goal is long-term health. For a long time, endurance athletes assumed that more volume at moderate intensity was the key. But when researchers started directly comparing different training styles, something very interesting emerged. Short bouts of very high-intensity exercise consistently produce larger and faster improvements in VO2 max than long-duration steady-state exercise. One landmark finding came from studies comparing zone 2 training with high-intensity interval training, often abbreviated as HIIT. These protocols typically involve working at 85 to 95% of your maximum heart rate, or even higher for short intervals, followed by recovery periods. When researchers measured VO2 max before and after training, the HIIT groups almost always outperformed the moderate intensity groups, even when the total exercise time was significantly lower. Why does this happen? The answer lies in how the body adapts to stress. VO2 max is largely limited by central factors, especially cardiac output, meaning how much blood your heart can pump per minute. During very intense exercise, your heart is forced to operate near its maximum capacity. Stroke volume increases, heart muscle contracts more forcefully. And over time, the left ventricle adapts by becoming stronger and more efficient. Zone 2 simply doesn't place enough demand on the heart to trigger these maximal adaptations. It's challenging, but not challenging enough. High-intensity exercise also creates a powerful signal at the cellular level. It rapidly depletes ATP, increases AMP levels, and strongly activates pathways like AMPK and PGC1 alpha. These are master regulators of mitochondrial biogenesis and aerobic capacity. While zone 2 activates these pathways to some degree, high-intensity intervals activate them much more robustly in a shorter period of time. Another key point is oxygen extraction. During near-maximal efforts, your muscles are forced to extract and utilize oxygen at their upper limit. This improves capillary density and mitochondrial efficiency, and the ability of muscle fibers to handle high oxidative demand. Over time, this shifts your entire oxygen utilization curve upward. What's fascinating is that some of the most effective protocols are incredibly short sprint interval training, which involves all-out efforts lasting 20 to 30 seconds, repeated just a few times, has been shown to significantly increase VO2 max in as little as 2 to 3 weeks. That doesn't mean it's easy. In fact, it's extremely uncomfortable. But from a biological adaptation standpoint, it's incredibly efficient. Now, this doesn't mean that zone 2 is useless or that everyone should abandon it. Zone 2 supports metabolic health, recovery, and exercise sustainability. But if your goal is to maximize VO2 max, the science is very clear. You need periods of very high intensity. So now let's get very specific about what scientists mean when they say high intensity, because this is where a lot of people get confused. Many people think they're training hard, but physiologically, they're not actually reaching the intensity required to meaningfully increase VO2 max. In the research, the most effective VO2 max boosting workouts consistently push people to at least 90% of their maximum heart rate, and often very close to their true aerobic ceiling. This is not zone 3 or slightly uncomfortable cardio. This is the kind of effort where speaking more than a few words becomes nearly impossible, breathing is extremely labored, and fatigue rises very quickly. One of the most studied and effective protocols is called the 4x4 method. This involves 4 minutes of hard effort at about 90 to 95% of max heart rate, followed by 3 minutes of active recovery repeated 4 times. This protocol was pioneered by researchers in Norway and has been tested in a wide range of populations, including sedentary adults, older individuals, and patients with cardiovascular disease. So across the board, it produces large increases in VO2 max. What makes the 4x4 so powerful is duration at near maximal oxygen consumption. It's not just about hitting a high intensity briefly, it's about sustaining that intensity long enough for oxygen demand, cardiac output, and muscle oxygen extraction to reach their peak. Those 4-minute intervals are long enough to push the heart to its maximum pumping capacity repeatedly within a single session. Another highly effective approach is sprint interval training. This looks very different. Instead of 4-minute efforts, sprint training uses very short bursts, usually 20 to 30 seconds, at near all-out intensity. These are followed by longer recovery periods. Even though the total workout time may only be 10 to 15 minutes, the physiological stress is enormous. Sprint interval training rapidly spikes heart rate, oxygen demand, and metabolic stress. It strongly activates signaling pathways involved in mitochondrial growth and cardiovascular adaptation. What's remarkable is that studies show sprint interval training can produce VO2 max improvements comparable to traditional endurance training, but with a fraction of the time commitment. However, there is an important distinction here. Sprint interval training is extremely demanding on the nervous system and musculoskeletal system. It's very effective, but it's not something most people should do frequently, especially beginners. Injury risk and recovery capacity matter. Another form of exercise that consistently ranks very high for VO2 max improvements is incline-based or resistance-loaded aerobic work. Things like uphill running, stair climbing, rowing, cycling with high resistance, or even weighted carries performed at high intensity. These modalities recruit a large amount of muscle mass, which dramatically increases oxygen demand. The more muscle mass you recruit, and the harder your heart has to work to deliver oxygen. This is one reason why running often produces higher VO2 max values than cycling in the same individual. Running engages more total muscle mass, particularly in the posterior chain and stabilizing muscles. The same principle applies to cross-country skiing, which consistently produces some of the highest VO2 max values ever recorded in humans. Another key factor researchers emphasize is time spent near VO2 max. The best workouts are not necessarily the ones that feel the hardest subjectively, but the ones that maximize the number of minutes your body spends operating at or near its maximum oxygen consumption. This is why interval structure matters so much. If intervals are too short, you don't reach VO2 max long enough. If they're too long, intensity drops and quality declines. The sweet spot, according to much of the literature, is intervals lasting between 2 and 5 minutes at very high intensity. What's also important is that these adaptations are highly specific. So if you want to improve VO2 max, you have to train in a way that directly challenges oxygen delivery and utilization. Strength training alone won't do it. Zone 2 alone won't do it optimally. You need targeted stress. One of the most alarming things about VO2 max is how quickly it declines if you don't actively train it, especially as you age. Starting as early as your late 20s or early 30s, VO2 max begins to decrease at a rate of about 1% per year. After the age of 50, that decline can accelerate even further. By the time many people reach their 70s, they may have lost 30 to 40% of their peak aerobic capacity. This matters because VO2 max is not just a number. It determines how much physiological reserve you have. It influences how well you tolerate illness, surgery, infections, and even cognitive stress. When your VO2 max is low, everyday tasks like climbing stairs carrying groceries, or walking uphill require a much larger fraction of your maximum capacity. And that's when fatigue sets in, mobility declines, and independence starts to erode. So what's driving this age-related decline? Several factors are at play. Maximal heart rate decreases with age. Stroke volume declines as the heart becomes less compliant. Muscle mass decreases, especially fast twitch fibers that are highly responsive to high-intensity stimuli. Capillary density and mitochondrial function also decline if they're not regularly challenged. Here's the key insight from the research. Moderate intensity exercise slows some aspects of this decline, but it does not fully prevent it. High intensity exercise, on the other hand, directly targets the systems that deteriorate most with age. When older adults engage in high-intensity interval training, researchers see improvements in stroke volume, cardiac output, and endothelial function. The heart becomes more efficient at pumping blood, and blood vessels become better at dilating and delivering oxygen. These changes are not just preserved, they are often reversed, even in people who had been sedentary for decades. One study that really illustrates this compared older adults who performed moderate continuous exercise with those who did structured high-intensity intervals. Both groups improved, but the high-intensity group saw significantly larger gains in VO2 max and maintained those gains for longer. The moderate group plateaued quickly. What's particularly fascinating is the effect on mitochondria. Aging is associated with mitochondrial dysfunction, reduced ATP production, and increased oxidative stress. High-intensity exercise strongly stimulates mitochondrial turnover, meaning damaged mitochondria are removed and replaced with new, more efficient ones. This process, known as mitophagy, is critical for maintaining cellular energy production as we age. High-intensity exercise also preserves type 2 muscle fibers. These fibers are essential for power, balance, and preventing falls. Zone 2 exercise primarily recruits slow twitch fibers, which are important, but they don't fully engage the muscle fibers that are lost most rapidly with age. And without high-intensity stimuli, those fibers atrophy. Another often overlooked factor is autonomic function. VO2 max is closely tied to heart rate variability and the balance between the sympathetic and parasympathetic nervous systems. High-intensity training improves autonomic flexibility, meaning your body can ramp up and recover more efficiently. This has implications not only for physical performance, but also for stress resilience and sleep quality. There's also a cognitive component. High-intensity exercise increases levels of brain-derived neurotrophic factor, or BDNF, more robustly than moderate exercise. BDNF supports neuroplasticity, learning, and memory. As VO2 max improves, cerebral blood flow improves as well, which may help protect against age-related cognitive decline. Of course, safety matters, especially as people get older. High intensity does not mean reckless. In the studies, intensity is progressed gradually, recovery is prioritized, and medical conditions are screened. But the idea that older adults should avoid intensity is not supported by the data. In fact, avoiding intensity may accelerate decline. At this point, it should be clear that high-intensity exercise is one of the most powerful tools we have for increasing and preserving VO2 max. But this is where nuance really matters. The goal is not to replace all of your training with brutal intervals. And the goal is to strategically combine different intensities in a way that maximizes adaptation while minimizing injury, fatigue, and burnout. This is where Zone 2 still plays an important role. Zone 2 training builds the aerobic foundation that allows you to tolerate and recover from high-intensity work. It improves mitochondrial density, fat oxidation, lactate clearance, and capillary networks. Think of it as expanding the base of the pyramid, while high-intensity training raises the peak. Research on elite endurance athletes consistently shows a polarized training model. Roughly 70 to 80% of training volume is performed at low intensity, mostly Zone 2 or below. About 10 to 20% is performed at very high intensity, near VO2 max, and very little time is spent in the moderate middle zone. This pattern shows up again and again in athletes with the highest aerobic capacity. For non-athletes, the ratios don't need to be that extreme, but the principle still applies. You need enough low-intensity work to support recovery and metabolic health, and enough high-intensity work to drive central cardiovascular adaptations. A practical approach for most people is 2 high-intensity sessions per week. These sessions could involve 4x4 intervals, shorter 2 to 3 minute intervals, or even hill repeats. The key is that at least part of the session pushes you close to your maximum sustainable effort. 1 to 2 days per week is enough to produce meaningful improvements without overwhelming the system. On the other days, Zone 2 work can be used to accumulate volume and reinforce aerobic efficiency. This could be brisk walking, easy jogging, cycling, rowing, or swimming at an intensity where you can still hold a conversation, but feel clearly challenged. These sessions enhance recovery between high-intensity days and support long-term consistency. Recovery is not optional. High-intensity exercise places significant stress on the cardiovascular system, muscles, and nervous system. Without adequate sleep, nutrition, and rest days, the benefits quickly diminish. Overreaching can blunt VO2 max gains and increase injury risk. Another important consideration is progression. The body adapts quickly, so stimulus must evolve early on. Simply reaching high heart rates may be enough. Over time, increasing interval duration, adding repetitions, or slightly reducing recovery can help maintain progress, but progression should be slow and deliberate. It's also critical to individualize modality. Not everyone should be sprinting or running hard intervals. Cycling, rowing, elliptical training, and incline walking can all be used to reach high intensities with lower joint impact. The best exercise is the one that allows you to safely and consistently reach near maximal effort. Wearable technology can be helpful here. Heart rate monitors provide objective feedback and prevent both undertraining and overtraining. Perceived exertion is useful, but heart rate adds another layer of precision, especially for people new to intensity-based training. What's really exciting is how quickly these adaptations occur. VO2 max responds rapidly to the right stimulus. In many studies, significant improvements are seen within 4 to 6 weeks. That means it's never too late to start. Even decades of inactivity do not eliminate the body's ability to adapt. When we talk about VO2 max, it's easy to think of it as something only athletes should care about. But the data tells a very different story. VO2 max may be one of the most powerful integrated markers of overall health. It reflects cardiovascular function, lung capacity, muscle metabolism, mitochondrial health, and even nervous system regulation, all in a single number. Large-scale epidemiological studies show a clear dose-dependent relationship between VO2 max and mortality. Each incremental increase in VO2 max is associated with a meaningful reduction in the risk of death from all causes. And what's striking is that the biggest risk reduction occurs when people move from very low fitness to moderate fitness. You don't need to become elite. You just need to avoid being unfit. Higher VO2 max is associated with lower risk of heart disease, stroke, type 2 diabetes, and certain cancers. It's also associated with better immune function. People with higher aerobic capacity tend to have better outcomes when facing infections and recover more quickly from illness. This is especially relevant as we age, when immune resilience becomes increasingly important. There's also a strong connection between VO2 max and brain health. Higher aerobic fitness is linked to improved cerebral blood flow, better executive function, and reduced risk of cognitive decline. Exercise-induced increases in BDNF and other neurotrophic factors support synaptic plasticity and learning throughout the lifespan. In practical terms, this means better memory, faster processing speed, and greater mental resilience. From a quality of life perspective, VO2 max determines how much of your day feels easy versus exhausting. When your aerobic capacity is high, daily activities require less effort. You recover faster. You have more energy, you're more physically capable and more confident in your body. This has profound psychological benefits as well. One of the most empowering aspects of VO2 max is that it's trainable at almost any age. Studies in people in their 60s, 70s, and even 80s show significant improvements with properly supervised high-intensity training. The idea that decline is inevitable is simply not supported by the science. What matters most is consistency and intent. Short, focused bouts of high-intensity exercise combined with regular, low-intensity movement create a powerful stimulus for adaptation. You don't need hours every day. You need the right signals applied repeatedly over time. It's also important to remember that exercise is not just about extending lifespan, but health span. Increasing VO2 max helps preserve independence, mobility, and resilience. It allows you to engage more fully with life, whether that means traveling, playing with grandchildren, or simply moving through your day without fatigue. So, if you've been relying exclusively on moderate, steady exercise, consider this an invitation to rethink your approach. Keep the zone 2 work, but layer in intensity, challenge your cardiovascular system, push your limits safely and intelligently. The return on investment is enormous. VO2 max is not just a fitness metric. It's a window into how well your body functions as a whole. And the science is very clear. If you want to improve it and protect it as you age, high intensity exercise is not optional. It's essential.